Okay, well, thank you. I am thrilled that so many people are participating in this training, which is being supported through our regional swamp contract dollars and hosted by Moss Landing Marine Laboratories. And it's Stacy Swenson and Marco Sadala, who our swamp staff have worked with extensively for years, over 10 years, as far as putting our data into the swamp database. That's the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program. And, you know, they've always been very professional and accommodating. They've helped troubleshoot and, you know, customize some of our data uploads and how we manage and look at that data. So just going over some acronyms. Ceden, the California Environmental Data Exchange Network. It was created by the State Water Resources Control Board with support from SWAMP. That's the Surface Water Ambient Program. Each regional board throughout the state of California, which there are 9, they have a SWAMP program in-house, and those staff go out and collect ambient water quality data. Also, we recognize that there's a lot of data collection going on throughout the state of California through academia, researchers, nonprofit organizations, citizen monitoring, and the state board produced Ceden to create a centralized area that all this data can be uploaded to. And, you know, there's a lot of benefits to that, so we can identify where there's a paucity of data, maybe additional water bodies that we need to focus more attention on. Also, this data is used by the regional boards and the state board to do its integrated report process, which is a process that considers all the data that's been collected and evaluates it and compares it against criteria, water quality objectives, to evaluate whether that surface water is impaired or not. If the water body is impaired, it then gets listed on what's called the 303D list. So we're just trying to build up these data sets so we have a more robust set of information to make these decisions so they're more informed. So we're thankful that we're getting more people putting data into Ceden. I think that's all I have to add. Stacy, if you want to start.
Yep. Hi, my name is Stacy. I have been at Moss Landing since 2004, and as Mary indicated, both myself and Marco were formerly part of the data management team for the SWAMP program, and were responsible for actually creating the SWAMP database and then helping to manage all that monitoring data that was collected through the program. In addition, we also helped the state board set up the Ceden system. The Ceden system and the SWAMP system are based on a SQL database, and they all share the same structure. All of the individual 4 RDCs also store their data in a similar structure. As Mary indicated, Ceden is currently a data storage system. Data is being provided to Ceden either through an RDC like ourselves. There's 3 other RDCs along in the state of California, or the water board itself is providing data to the Ceden system. And as she mentioned, it is primarily used by the water board for their 303D listing assessment. There are 2 types or several types of data providers that provide data to Ceden. One is a data provider that might be required under a grant to provide data to Ceden. Another example of a data provider might be a citizen monitoring group that doesn't have a requirement but has collected a lot of data over time and simply wants it to be used in the listing assessment or made public. So today, I'm going to walk through the process of submitting your data to Ceden through our regional data center here at Moss Landing. This is going to be a general overview and will contain a lot of information. So when you get down to actually submitting your data, I'll be here and can work with you one-on-one. I just wanted to let you know that we will be going over quite a bit of information. So first is the data flow process, how the data gets from you, the data provider, all the way to Ceden. And the first step in the process is really under the control of the data provider. The data provider has a project, they want to register their project, they will populate a template, format it in the required format. They will then upload and check their file using the data checker. They will go through the process of fixing errors that are generated or submitting new vocabulary. And this process will continue until you check your file and it's clean and you're given the big green submit button, and then the file would be submitted to our RDC. At that point, the file is taken over by the staff here at MPSL. And at this point, we'll take your file and we actually load your file using data loaders. And the data loaders just basically append the data into the appropriate data tables in the back-end SQL database. We have data tables for lab results, field results, toxicity results. In addition, an additional review or updates may occur once it's loaded in the database, but when it is loaded in the database, you, the data provider, will have access to this data using our online data management system. I believe we are one of the only RDCs that currently have these web forms capability, and this will allow you to look at your data in the database format, make any edits, finalize the data, and then let me know for approval. And then we here will mark the data for export. And then on a weekly basis, the data is exported to Ceden, to the Ceden system at the state board. We do weekly exports. They occur on Saturdays. So if you've loaded your data in, submitted your data, I've loaded it into the system, it's been approved. On that Saturday, it will be sent to Ceden. On Monday, it will be on the Ceden system on their advanced query tool, the AQT. And the only caveat to that is as long as any associated vocabulary, controlled vocabulary or valid values have been approved by Ceden, the data will show up. Otherwise, it may take a week or two for that vocabulary to be approved, and then your data set will be available to the public. So, are there any questions about the flow? Okay. I'm going to move on to our website. Currently, this is the website. Is an easy way, I can send out the link, but an easy way is just to Google MLRDC, and it will bring you up to the link. This is our home page. The university, San Jose State Research Foundation, who we work under, is currently updating all of the web pages under the Disabilities Act. So in a couple of weeks, the view of our web page will be slightly different, but all of the parts will still be there. So I'm going to take you to the data center page. This is the page where you're going to find the most information. You will find templates, documentation, lookup lists. We have webinars. So when you're going to your page, focus here on the left. We have it in chronological order from how to submit data all the way to checking your data. So when we click on this how to submit data page, you will see these 5 bullets here from start to finish. The initial contact, new project registration page. This has my contact information along with a project registration template, which I will go over shortly. The next tab is the tab that will bring you to the templates and documents. And if you click here on data templates, it will bring you up to this main data template and documentation page. And you'll see it's divided into 3 columns: MPSL, Ceden, and SWAMP. The documents under each column are the official documents for that program, or in our case, RDC, the data types that we have. So any of these documents were created by us here. These documents here are the official Ceden documents. They link to the Ceden documents on the Ceden website. And these, just for informational purposes, these are the official SWAMP documents that link to the SWAMP website. This is our link to the data checker, and again, I'll be going into more detail about this. This is the data checker. This is the checker that you will be using the most. It is the checker that checks the Ceden template. And this is the link to the checker itself. And then we also have a link to checker description. So when you get an error, it breaks it down quite nicely. So you can understand why you're getting the error and how to fix it. And we'll go through that. And then here's another external link for lookup list. Another important page to know about is the online service status. This is the status of all of our tools here. If you are running into trouble, you would come here first to see if perhaps the tool is down. So for example, our CalDux checker that checks the Ceden template is up. It's highlighted in green. The status is up. But currently, the checker that we have that checks the SWAMP template is down, and so you'll see this in red with the status of down. Okay. So these are the main pages that you will need to visit in order to submit your data. Okay.
Yeah, this is Mark. Go ahead. Mark, Simplex Cornell is up at the front desk.
Oh, hold on 1 second. I'm almost there.
I'll let them know.
Okay. So, upon the initial contact portion, when you're ready, you've gone out and collected data, or you're planning on going out to collect data and you want to submit your data to Ceden. There are some first steps that should be taken to help with the process, and that step is the register your project. As I mentioned here, we have a project registration template, and then we have associated guidance. The project registration template can be found here as well. And it contains the key lookup values that you will need in order to register your project. There are several what we call vocabulary templates. There's the master vocabulary template that that Ceden has. Contains all of the lookup lists, and I'll show you that in more detail. But this one here is all the same information, but it's condensed down into only the information that you need to populate in order to register your project. And discussing the project, our project is a hierarchy system. It's based on a program, a parent project, and a project. And the reasoning that it was set up this way was in order to help query out data on a very high level or down to a very detailed level. So in my example here, when you're going to think about creating a project, you first have to have a program, then you'll need a parent project, and then you'll need your individual project. In this example, TMDL is your program. So that is the overarching program that you will be collecting your data under. The next level is the parent project. This is slightly higher than individual projects. In this case, I use the example of Region 6 TMDL. So if you were a user, you wanted to pull your data out, I want all the TMDL data in the state of California, you could pull it all out by this main program. But if you were Mary or Kelly at the regional board and said, I want to pull all of my region's TMDL data that may have many data providers collecting under it, I could query out my data using this parent project. And then if you're the individual user yourself, you would create projects based on really how you think about your data, how you organize your data for your program. So in this case, for this example, I have Red Creek TMDL spring and fall. For example, they may, and it's just a totally made up project, but maybe this data provider has to do a spring report and a fall report. So you may want to consider, like this, in this example, breaking it down like that. So you could query out all of your spring data and write your report, and then all of your fall data. Or maybe you're a data provider like Blue Lake, where you don't really need to, you're doing a report on a yearly basis. And so you would create your project for the entire year. So there's many ways to think about a project. When you come to this point, I'd be more than happy to provide guidance and based on your sampling design or how you think about the projects for your program. So registering a project, you need the program, a parent project, and a project. But we also need to know the sampling agency, which is who collected the sample, the sampling protocol, which is a document that describes the protocol you followed when you did your sampling. This might be your sampling design or a SAP, a sampling analysis plan. It could be the same as your quality assurance project plan, or it could be a standalone document. We also need to have your project QAP information. That's your document for your entire project or program. And this is very important if you want your data to be used by the 303D assessment group. They need to know, they need to have a copy of your QAP, and your data must be associated to a QAP in order for them to use your data in the assessment. So with these bits of information, you would go to your project registration, and it has examples of existing programs, and you can see how they would be formatted. They have the parent project, and then project, and QAP, and your protocol. Now, there may be existing values that you could use, and so in order to check into that, you would go back to your template and documentation page. Under the headings, you'll see 3 sets of lookup lists. This lookup list is a lookup list associated to our regional data center. The center lookup list links back to Ceden's master lookup list, and this lookup list contains valid values from all of the RDCs and SWAMP. Our RDC does not have all of the values because we do not have all the data associated to, we don't store valid values unless they're associated to the data that we store. It just becomes a management nightmare because somebody in the other RDC may change a value and then not notify, and then it just causes conflicts across the state, and you lose comparability. So we only store in our RDC lookup values associated to our data. So this is where you would want to come to look and double check to see if there's a program that might exist that you could use. For example, TMDL is an existing program, and so you would know that you wouldn't need to request that program because it already exists. And we have a screenshot, or you can click on the Excel and download the file, which is a lot easier, especially if you have a lot of, if the lookup list is large, it's easier to search and filter in Excel than on the screen. So once that is populated, then we move on to stations. This is another important part in your project registration. Stations in the system is the point on the map where you collected your sample. You can use existing stations, or you can create new stations. But the biggest caveat with the stations is the station code and station name must be unique to any of the existing values. So here's an example station from Region 6. If you had Wilson Creek lower, you would have to use the existing station code. You couldn't create a different station code with the same name, and vice versa. You couldn't have this station code with a different name. They would both have to be unique. And so on the project registration template, there is a tab for stations. And then an example of how to populate that. And we'll go over the templates and their color coding in just a second. So once your project has been set up, your stations have been created, you would submit the template to me. I would review them. I would then add them to our data system, and then I would also send that vocabulary request off to the Ceden group for their approval of the values. And then once those values are in the system, then they will also be on the checker, which I'll explain that. So now we're going to move on to actually working with the data templates. And here's our data template page. So when you're deciding the type of data that you have, you'll come to this page, and you will want to pull your templates here from Ceden. These are the official Ceden documents. For every Ceden template, we have fields: water sediment chemistry, tissue chemistry, toxicity, taxonomy. You'll see time series down here. Just a quick note, Ceden at this time does not store time series data. They don't have the structures. we at Moss Landing are working on having time series be able, for our data providers to be able to store time series in our system. And then when Ceden's ready and has the capability, then we can export the time series data to Ceden at that time. For every template, there's a template example, and then there's associated documentation. So the blank template is what you would start with. If you needed reference on how to populate the tabs or the fields, then you could pull up the example template. And then the documentation, which is key will help you populate your template as well. And remember, you'll have this recording and the associated documentation, and of course myself to help you with the population. Now, Mary had asked me to use some example data from a lab report that she provided. And so I started populating the chemistry template. And this is for the Tahoe Keys Property Owners Association. This is some cyanotoxin data. Bacteria data is stored in the lab result table, so you would use the chemistry template for that. All of the templates that we have are formatted in the same fashion. When you first open the template, of course it will be blank, but you'll head down here on the bottom, you'll see the 4 tabs. The first tab is the notes. All of our templates have a notes tab. This is where you'll find the color coding key, links to documentation. This section here with the online data checkers will probably need to be updated. The state board updates their templates once a year. They have a request period for, I think it's 6 months, 3 to 6 months, of when people can request for changes or updates to be made. Then Ceden reviews those requests and will either make the changes or politely decline and explain the reason why. But it's on a yearly basis. So if you grab a template, it shouldn't change for a whole year. And then at the bottom of the notes tab, it will tell you what the updates were. So when you do get an updated template, you'll know what changed. The next tab that we have is the locations tab. This tab is for people that take actual lat-longs at their station. So stations are stored in the database with the target lat-long, and some groups, for example, the swamp group, it's required that they take an actual lat-long, and so they want to store that information. If you take actual lat-longs when you go out, you would populate this tab. Otherwise, you would just leave it blank. The next tab is the results tab. It's chem results because it's the chem template, but it's field results in the field and habitat results. And then you'd have toxicity summary and toxicity replicate, depending on the template that you use. All templates are formatted in a similar fashion. They're all color-coded the same way. In the first part of the template, columns A through R is information that would come from the sampling crew or your field data sheet. This would be populated using that information. We have several ways to get this information into the database. You are welcome to populate the template, but we also have data entry forms, which Marco will demonstrate a little bit later, where you can enter your samples into the database, and then it would spit out the template for you with all this information populated based on the data entry that you did. So that is another option. Starting at the header row, you'll see the green and the black and the gray and the orange. Green is a required field. It must be populated with information. Black is a highly desired field. And in this case, you may not have the information, but you cannot leave it blank. You need to use a default. And then the gray with the orange writing is not a required field. It's there for you to use to provide more information if necessary. For example, sample comments or lab collection comments. If you had something that you wanted to make note of when you collected the sample, you could, add some text in here, but it's not required. In the header row, there's also carets. The carets will either include the associated lookup, default value, or formatting requirements if they have them. So for example, here's station code. The associated lookup to find where you would get your valid value from is the station lookup. The next column over, for example, is sample date. This one has a formatting requirement. It must be day, day, month, 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 year, year, year. And if you don't have a sample date, then your default would be 1/1/1950. It's very important to, when you're using the template, to format the data correctly, and in addition, not to remove tabs or move columns. And the reasoning for that is the data checkers are set up to recognize the type of template that you're using based on the tabs that are included and the location and position of the field. So if you move them and you try to check them, you will get an error and it won't be able to recognize your template. So continuing on, we have the project code. This should have been set up at the beginning along with the station codes. And then we move to event code. Event code is the type of collection that you took. Did you do a tissue collection, a water quality, or bioassessment? This field is a hierarchy. So if you went out to a station and you took a tissue sample and some water quality, maybe some nutrient data, your event would actually be tissue, and underneath would be the known that it would also possibly contain some water quality. So it is a hierarchy. This is your protocol code, as I mentioned before, the code that you use to designate the document you followed when you sampled. Agency code here is your sample agency. We have many different agency codes, and they're pretty descriptive about which one they represent, but this one represents who did the sampling. And then we have location code. Location code is actually where in your station you stood when you collected your sample. And in this example, it's the bank. So I had my water body, I stood on the bank, and I took my sample. Perhaps if you were out on a lake and you were doing tissue, your location could be open water. And again, you would go to the location lookup list and you would pull it down here to get your locations that might be applicable to you. And you can see we have quite an extensive list of locations. Collection time, again, has a required format. Collection method how you went, the method that you used to collect it, water grab, sed grab, maybe auto sampler, spat bag if you're doing that for your cyanobacteria sampling. Then we have the sample type code, which describes the type of sample. A grab is just a discrete sample. You might have an integrated sample, which could be integrated over depth or even time, but not time in the sense of a continuous monitoring, which is, you know, maybe every few minutes. More integrated over time as in a use for a short-term auto sampler, like a 24-hour or a 7-day, where then all of the samples are put together and then analyzed as a single sample. That's what we mean by integrated there. The replicate here is your collection replicate. If you collected a field duplicate, all of the information from A through L would be the same, except column M, your replicate would be a 2 to designate that it was a duplicate. We also have a sample type field blind duplicate available if you do take blind field duplicate. Moving down, we have the collection device. Again, not a recorded field, but we do have generic collection devices, and we can add collection devices if you have those specific to your agency. For example, if you have a, you know, agency XYZ, YSI, you know, 566, we can add it to the database for you, and it would be associated to your agency. The nice thing about gathering this type of information is if over time, if you realize that maybe one of your devices wasn't working properly, you could distinguish your data set by pulling it out by device, and then you would know which results might be affected by that bad device. And then we have collection depth and collection depth unit. The default is for subsurface is 0.1. The importance about depth is, and about many other values, is that it needs to be in meters for water and centimeters for sediment. If you take in feet and inches, you will need to convert. We try to keep comparability across the data sets so that when users pull out data, they don't have to do a lot of crunching of numbers or crosswalking or converting, so that everybody's looking at apples to apples and not apples to oranges, and then having to figure out what they need to do to get their data set all the same. So you will when requesting sometimes new vocabulary, it might come back to say, well, you need to convert this to this specific unit so that everything is comparable across the board. So that's columns A through R. Again, this is from the sampling information. And then we move down to the next half of the template, which is S through the end. And this information is coming to you from the laboratory. It would either come to you electronically, or as I got this information from a hard copy. Electronically, it's helpful if you're working with a lab consistently and you have a contract with them, that you have them format it for you in the Ceden template. Some labs have LIM systems, and they can format their output to match the template. It cuts down a lot of work, especially if you have to go off a hard copy and manually enter that information. It's just something to think about. You know, sometimes you're in a current contract and you can't do that, but the next time around, you know, you could add that into your contract with the lab that, you know, you would like your results in the Ceden template format. You would need to provide them with columns A through R, but they could then populate columns S to the end. And that's where our data entry forms are very helpful, because if you've entered your sample information out, then you can generate the template and then send it off to the lab for them to finish populating. So all of this information, like I said, is coming from the laboratory. The first is lab batch. For chemistry results, most methods batch group the samples by laboratory batch. In this case, there was no indication of what the laboratory batch name was in the hard copy, so I created one so that the samples would group up together with their associated QC samples, their quality control samples, their blanks, their matrix spikes, any LCSs. So that's very important. Then we move down to analysis date. I'm just pointing this out because it does have the format as the day and the time. It's very important to have that in the correct format. The next 5 columns make up what we call a constituent in the Ceden system in our database. The individual parts make up a combination of the 5, and they're stored as that. This is key for when you're checking a file. You could get an error. You could have all 5 parts, but you might get an error that the combination of your 5 parts doesn't exist. And this just helps with speeding up of queries and pulling out data, and it also helps with referential integrity. And that is why we group the 5 as a combination, and it's stored as the combination. Then we'll move down. We have the lab replicate. This is a replicate not the same as the field duplicate. This is a replicate would be used if you had matrix spike duplicate or a laboratory duplicate, or in some cases triplicates. This number would increase 2, 3, 4, etc. Then we have our result fields, a ResQual field, the MDL and RL, QA code. It's the QA code is a field that is used to further describe a result. Laboratories might have their own, they might call them reason codes or flags that they put on the lab, on their lab reports, and they would just need to be crosswalked to the existing values. This is why if you had your laboratory that was formatting the data for you, they would go through that process and crosswalk their flags to the existing flags. And then again, more prep preservation, digest extract doesn't have to be populated unless the method actually has a digestion extraction, otherwise it would be none. And then here you can see these fields aren't required, but this is how we would record percent recoveries for lab QC. And so you can see here on this, in this template, I've shaded these purple. Obviously, when you give the lab, or the lab has the information, they're only going to have the field samples. And these samples here are the ones that the lab created. That's why when you look under sample agency, this is actually the lab agency, because they're the ones that collected or created that sample. Now, when you're going to populate your template, and there are a set of business rules, as I've gone over some of them in the header, but majority of the business rules can be found in the documentation, and I'm just going to pull this up. as it relates to the template. The documentation in the beginning, oh, I went to the end. Sorry. Here we go. The documentation, again, further describes the column requirements, which ones are required, which ones are desired. And then each field is here, the data type that it has to be, is it required, the size, where you can find that information, which lookup it's in, and then a definition about what the expectation is for that information. And also, in tandem, you could also look at the template example here that shows, gives you an example of the template already populated with different types of data. So there's an example for SED, water, bacteria. So you can use this as a reference. But when we're looking at the lab QA and QC samples, they have their own set of business rules. And in that documentation, after we scroll down through the table field, we come to a special section that really is very detailed about how to report your lab QC samples. So your laboratory QA samples, these are the laboratory generated QA samples. It will walk you through, this is what you use for your station codes, this is what you should use for your sample date and your project, all the way through what you should use for collection time. So it's very helpful in when you first start and getting to know how to record the laboratory QA samples. And then we have matrix spikes and laboratory duplicates that were samples as part of your project. So for many of the methods, they have a QC, quality control frequency requirement in order to validate the method. If your project is being run and you specifically did not collect additional aliquots of a sample for QC, the lab may use what we call a non-project sample. If you've collected enough for them to use one of your project samples, then you would follow this business rule. And these business rules are for matrix spikes and lab duplicates performed on one of your project samples. And then scrolling down, we have failed duplicates. We'll get to this section when it is non-project. So the rules, the business rules change slightly when it's this non-project. Now, in my example that I had for you, I couldn't discern from the laboratory data package whether it was a project or non-project, so I assumed it was a non-project, and then added that result here using the business rules for the non-project. So again, this document for the chemistry template and again, all the other templates, very, very helpful and a lot of detail on how to report QC samples of this nature.
Probably, yeah.
Okay. So the final tab is the lab batch tab. Again, this is the tab also created with information from the laboratory. We have our lab batches. The lab batches that are listed on this page will show up individually here on this tab. And then we have two types of agencies here. We have the lab agency code and a submitting agency code. The lab agency code represents the lab that did the actual analyses. The submitting lab is who submitted the laboratory data to the Ceden system. So in this case, it's Tahoe Keys Property Owners Association. Another time it might come into play is if Lab XYZ subcontracted out the analysis to Ben Genetics. The Lab XYZ would be the submitting agency since they're the master, but Ben Genetics would be the lab agency because they actually did the analysis. And it's helpful for this information so that as a user, if you go back to a data set and you have a question, you would know what lab and who to contact to get more information about that result. And then we have the lab submission code, which is the lab opinion about the data set. A is acceptable. We have lots of different codes. You can use MD for minor deviation if they felt there were some, maybe a matrix spike was out, and so, everything was great, but we had some slight deviations from our QAP. And then the batch verification code. The batch verification code goes in tandem with this compliance code. Data verification, just briefly, is an assessment of your data based on your measurement quality objectives. Usually these are stated in your QAP. It is not a requirement of Ceden to have your data verified in order for it to be accepted or even used. It does not have to be verified, but we do have data providers that either have someone that does it for themselves, or it's one of the services that we have here that we do data verification for other outside groups. If data verification does not occur, the default is NR. But if you were to verify data, this would be flagged with the appropriate code to the level of verification. And again, you would look up your batch verification lookup for codes about that. And then your compliance code would be updated. Compliance code meaning was I compliant with my QAP, and there are codes specific to that task as well. So does anybody have any questions about the template? Now remember too, this is very high level, and when you're going through the process of formatting and getting your data together, you'll have the recording. We also have other webinar recordings. You'll have the documentation, and you can contact me as well, and I will help you through the process.
Stacy?
Yes.
Oh, hi, it's Mary speaking. If you could maybe define QAP for some of the participants, and the important thing to note is that, and you did mention this earlier, for any data to be considered for the integrated report purpose, and that's where we were explaining before, where regional board staff take the data that's been entered into Ceden, and we do these assessments to determine if a surface water is impaired or not. A QAP must be submitted with your data set, and that is a quality assurance program. Project.
That's correct. A quality assurance, either program, plan, or project plan, depending on the level. But the QAP typically has, your study design, where you're going to sample, how you're going to sample, the equipment. It indicates the responsible parties. It then defines the laboratory, and it might specifically specify the laboratory analysis that are going to occur, any, reporting limits or target reporting limits that you must meet. As I mentioned before, measurement quality objectives, which are the criteria that you need to meet in order for your data to be usable or defensible. Measurement quality objectives are like percent recovery criteria or frequency criteria. I need to have one matrix spike per 20 samples, and they all have to be within 50 to 150 with an RPD of 25. That's your measurement quality objective. So the QAP documentation has this information. The EPA has a guidance document in creating a QAP. If you've never created one before, I think it's their G5 document or G9 document, but it's on the EPA website on how to create a QAP and the information that is important to have in it. So,
and Stacey, I do want to mention that the surface water ambient monitoring program, they have developed a lot of QAPs, and I know for entities in our region that are currently doing data collection, a lot of them are following those SWAMP QAPs, and that is acceptable.
That is acceptable, yes. Yep. And so if you are following the QAP, when you have your project will be associated to that QAP. So, so then the listing assessment will know, okay, this data set followed SWAMP, and they already have that document. So no need to resubmit. And they'll know too on the Ceden end, because in how the data is stored or how the projects are stored, that it's linked to the associated QAP to that project. So it's easy information for them to pull out, but you just have to, if it's QAP specific maybe to your program and not like the SWAMP QAP, then you would physically have to send it to the assessment unit for them to use.
Hi, Stacey, it's Kelly.
Oh, hi, Kelly.
Hi, can you go over what you do, verify data, and how that, makes it different than non-verified data? And also, is that data, if it's non-verified, usable with the integrated report? Do you know?
Yes, they'll use the data even if it isn't verified. There are benefits to verifying the data. It just, it's when you verify your data, it becomes data of known and documented quality. Whether the quality is good or bad, you'll know. If you don't verify your data, you'd have to make assumptions about it. But the process of data verification is taking a data set, taking it by batch, and comparing it, like I said, to the measurement quality objectives. Did they perform the required QC? Did they do a blank? Did they do a matrix spike? Did they do an LCS? Did they do it at the proper frequency? Did they do it 1 per 20 samples? Of the QC samples, did they meet the criteria? Was the blank, was the detects in the blank below the reporting limit? Was the matrix spike within, 50 to 150, for example? Was the precision less than 25%? That information. Surrogates, did they spike surrogates? Were the surrogates within the criteria listed in the QAP or the measurement quality objective? And so you go through the data set, comparing it to all of these requirements, and then you would flag the data where it didn't meet your QAP. And this is where the compliance code would come in. So if everything was hunky-dory, your compliance code would be compliant. You've met your requirements that were stated in your QAP. and then it moves down from there. So my matrix spike was out. Well, just to let the user know, it didn't meet the QAP, so I'm going to give it a qualified compliance code. And there's clear definitions of what these mean. You know, my data didn't meet the MQO and the QAP, but it's still good. You could still use it. There might be limitations, but you could probably, you know, still use it. And then down from there, there's estimating data. For example, a lab ran a result and it was above the calibration range and they couldn't dilute it, so they had to report it. And so they would estimate that value because it's above the calibration range and you can't really say that that number is a hard number, right? So, and then down from there is rejection. Data can be rejected by a laboratory or by a project manager. In verification, we don't reject data unless it's already been rejected by somebody else, because in verification, you don't really have, unless it's specifically stated, that typically doesn't have a criteria for rejection. If the laboratory rejected something, you know, say they got 0% recovery, and they rejected some results because the associated recoveries were 0, then the compliance code would then automatically, the QA code would be an R, and then the compliance code would be rejected. So it's just binning, essentially binning your data so that there's some knowledge about the quality of the data. And then, in addition, on top of that, we have data validation, which assesses usability. Now, data in Ceden does not go through the validation process, with the exception of the bioaccumulation group with the swamp group, because they're assessing fish consumption advisories. But because the data in Ceden is being used by so many people for so many different, to answer so many different questions, what could be usable for one person might not be usable for somebody else. So
your data through Moss Landing, is it automatically, do you guys verify, or is that something people have to request, or is that just?
Yeah, we don't automatically verify. It's a service that we can, you know, set up to provide, but you know, it's an additional service, it's outside the realm of, you know, Ceden, because it's not a requirement for Ceden.
Okay, and then are people allowed to self-verify their data? Yes,
you can self-verify. We do have people that verify the data based on their own QAP, and then they you know, will update and provide, you know, you'll see their values are not NR, that they've done it themselves.
Okay.
So they can do it themselves, or, you know, or somebody else in their organization can do it, but yes. But again, it's not a requirement, but if you want your data to be of known and documented quality, then, you know, we recommend that it does go through some sort of verification process.
Thank you.
Okay. So one final thing before I move on to the checker about the template is, as I mentioned before, you are going to have to populate your fields with the valid values, and I showed you the lookups. There may be cases where, for example, this agency is new and you will not find it in the lookup, and so then you're going to need to request it. And on our page of templates and documentation, at the very top, you'll see the vocabulary request. It's an official Ceden document. And this template, as I mentioned before, has all of the tabs that represent all of the lookup values. We also have, as all templates do, a notes tab, which gives you the key to the color coding. So again, the green, the gray are the same, you know, required fields, not required. The blue field is required for bioassessment. And that's really, you'll only really see that in the stations request for the GIS layers. And then some of the fields that we have in there are set up so that you won't go over the size restriction, and it occurs most often in the station code. I think it's a 25 limit. Sometimes we get people that, you know, want to put lots of characters in there, and so you'll get a warning if you're populating a field that has a field restriction and you've gone over it for your information. So you'll see all the tabs. Some of the lookup tabs have a helpful hint tab. For example, agency. When you're creating an agency, this is the business rule that needs to be followed when creating an agency. Analyte has the same. These are examples. More information on what information we're looking for in each of the fields, and then more additional business rules when creating analytes. So this is your vocabulary request template. I started one for this project, and we'll go over it after I run the file through the checker. But as you can see here on agency, the two agencies, oh dear, I'm sorry, I was on my other screen. You probably thought I was crazy. Let me start over. This is the notes tab here. And as I pointed out, the colors, color coding here, updates here, the tabs on the bottom, this is the agency, and this is, for example, the agency business rule tab. So when you're creating them, these business rules must be followed. And then here was the Analyte example tab that I was showing you, how it should be formatted and the information that we're looking for in the gray fields, if you do have that information, and then any business rules associated. So not all of the tabs have an associated business rule tab, but the more complex ones do. I'm sorry about that. So for the template that I was just showing you, I had to create these two agencies. This is a sample agency, and then this is the laboratory agency. So if I was a data provider, I would need to populate my vocabulary request form, and so I started that here just to show for an example. So it's Ben Genetics. These were the two that how I created it, but if you are going to provide data to our system, you know, we can, if this is not acceptable, we would fine tune it, go back and forth. That's what this review comment field is for. So you would email me this, say I have some new vocabulary, I would review it, I might come back to you and say, oh, can you remove this, you know, character, or can you, you know, add more information? We'd work on that, and then once we finalize that, then I would add it to the system, and then this would be sent to Ceden for their approval, so that once it's in our system, then they can accept it in their system. So now I'm going to run through the checker, and we have a link here to the data checker. This is the checker that checks the Ceden template. It is password protected, so when you first start, you will need to request a user ID and password. Upon your initial login, you will be prompted to update your password. If you ever forget your password, you just need to contact me and I'll reset it, and then you'll log in again and then can reset your password over again. So this is a system, I'm logged in, so you'll see this administration pop up, but when you log in, you will not see that. We're going to start here on the first drop down, and we're going to send our file to be checked. So in the checker process, it's basically upload, check, submit. 3 steps. And I just want to clarify, because some people think, well, I uploaded it, it must be in there, or I submitted it and it must be in there. So the first part is to upload your file. We're going to browse to it, and I'm going to use the template that we just went over, and I'm going to send the file. Based on the file size is how long it would take it to check. Obviously, this doesn't have very many records, so it checks it rather quickly. But if you have a file that has 40,000 records in it, it's going to take a few minutes to run. So upon running it, you're going to see your message that will say that it was uploaded. If there's a problem with the formatting of the file name, or you've moved a column by mistake, you will get an error here that it couldn't be recognized or it couldn't be uploaded, and then you would have to go back and adjust. I will say for the file, there can't be any spaces or special characters in the file name. That will cause an error. Underneath, you'll see this message. It says no verification emails were sent out. We have the ability to, if your project is being done under a grant and you are required to notify your grant manager that you've uploaded or checked or submitted your file to Ceden, we can assign your project to an email address. And so when you're working in the system, they will get email notifications. They're not required, so when if you don't have that requirement and see this message, you just ignore it. So then back to the first drop down, we're going to start file validation. So here you see that it's been uploaded into your inbox. It will tell you your organization ID here, the name of your file, the date and time that you've uploaded it. This is the remove, so when you're done, you can clean up your inbox, and then the check file. Again, the more records you have, the longer it's going to take to check. And once it's completed checking, you'll have an on-screen error report. In addition to the on-screen error report, you will receive an email notification with the errors in Excel. If this is handy, if you have very few errors, you might just want to go off the screen, and this box will tell you what the error is, what worksheet or which tab it's coming from, and how many you have. And then if you click View Results, you'll see that it individualizes them all, and you'll see that they're repeating because it's checking row by row, column by column, row by row. So if you have the same error repeated in 5 columns, you'll see the error 5 times. So this can get a little busy, and that is why the email is best. So if I go here, you'll see this email, your file did not pass, and here are your errors, and we'll download it. One second. Again, you have a Notes tab, and then the list of your errors. Now on this Notes tab, you'll see errors and warnings. Our checks are binned into severity. Errors have to be fixed in order to submit. If you went back to the page and you scrolled to the bottom, you'll see submit data to Ceden. If you tried to submit, it said, sorry, you have 96 errors and you need to fix them. So it will not allow you to submit if you do have errors. Then we have warnings. We would like you to fix the warnings before you submit. But if, for example, you have a requirement of you must submit your data to Ceden on a quarterly basis, and it's the third month of the quarter and it's the 30th of the month, and you're realizing that you need to submit your data, at a minimum, you need to fix the errors. The warnings will allow you to submit it, so you would meet your deadline. And then when I went to the process of loading, we would work through the errors at that point. So you would still meet your requirement of and then the next tab is the errors tab. And I'm just gonna, you'll see the error, the worksheet, the row, which column it is, what the value is that may or may not be causing the problem, and then the severity of it. If you get an error and you're not sure of how to handle it, we do have on the checker page, we have the data checker descriptions. And this is very handy tool. Again, has a notes tab. And then the types of error descriptions. So we're doing chemistry, so we would come to the chemistry description page. It will give you the error. It will describe the error that you're getting, how the checker generated the error, what it was looking for to generate the error, and then a helpful hint on how to check it or fix it, and then whether or not you can ignore that error or you really need to fix it. So this is very helpful. We also have a few links on the actual checker page that will take you to a different view, not as detailed about your error. So if we go to just a couple of the errors, just so that you can see how to troubleshoot. The first one, missing collection depth. It's a required field. So there's only one, it's Excel row number 9. And then if we go down to Excel row number 9, we'll see, yes, it's blank here. So we would just populate it, and then that error would save it and that error would be fixed. Another error is, you'll see a lot of these say, not found in the agency, not found in the analyte. Well, we know about the two that I created, which was the Ben genetics and the Ben genetics and the Tahoe keys. But if I look at analyte, I see I only have one, and it says anatoxin. So the first thing that I would want to do to troubleshoot is to see if that exists in the lookup. And so then I would come back and I'd go to my lookup list and I would look up analyte and I would download it. And then I could either search for anatoxin or part of anatoxin, but this is all alphabetical, so I'm going to come down and I'm going to look, and I'm going to see, yeah, anatoxin-A. So the reason for my error wasn't that it's a new value. The reason for my error is that it wasn't formatted correctly. So then I would come back here to my spreadsheet row number 19, and then I would update that. So that's just one way to troubleshoot an error, is to just double check that the formatting. A lot of cases, especially with analytes, it's a formatting issue. There's extra space, or there's the parentheses in the wrong place. Let's see. And then one last error here is the constituent. This is, again, how we store our method, matrix, analyte, fraction. So all of these individual pieces are here. We didn't get errors for method or matrix. We got the one method for analyte. We fixed that in fraction and unit. So I know my parts are all right. It's just a combination of them. So in this case, you would fill out your vocab request template on your constituent tab, and you would add all of those constituent combinations here. And then I would go ahead and add them to the system. Now, our system for checking, if you have new vocabulary, it takes 24 hours for it to show up on this checker. So on a Monday, if you're running files and you see that you have new values, you'll populate the template. We'll work through that, and then I'll add them to the Moss Landing lookups on Monday. On Tuesday, when you go to rerun your file, you should not get any errors for missing vocabulary. So it only takes 24 hours. And then you'll be able to submit data. Now, as I mentioned before, data, because it's finalized in our system and sent to Ceden on Saturday, that vocabulary still has to be approved on the Ceden end. And so if it's that first week and you had new vocabulary, it will take an additional week for it to show up in Ceden, because they need the week to process the new value that we added in our system. That makes sense. Okay, and so the process would be running your file, uploading your file, working through your errors. And then once your file is all to the point where you think you've cleaned it up, we go back to check the file, and we're just going to pretend that this one is all cleaned up. You'd upload it. Again, you've successfully uploaded, and then go to file validation and check the file. And then congratulations, you've passed the checks and it's ready to be submitted. And so then you just hit the submit button, and you have the opportunity to email anybody else that you want to know that you're submitting it. And then if you have any messages, and then you would hit submit to Ceden. And again, when you hit the data to Ceden, it is, let me just pull this up one more time. When you hit the data submit button to Ceden, it's then at this point in the process, in the load file process. And so for us, the file, it comes into a receptacle folder here, and it is tagged, I'll just show you briefly because this will be important when Marco does his demonstration. It comes into this submitted file, and you'll see here is the file that we just checked, and it attaches a timestamp to it. And then this timestamp follows that file throughout our system, and using the web forms, which Marco will show you, you can track the status of your file. And you can track it by the name, or you can track it by the timestamp or project, and he'll go through that. And so this is how we track the progress. And so then at that point, I would load your file for you, and then we have an opportunity to currently run the file on another additional set of checks, which is our checks that we created when we were managing SWAMP. They're more strict. Ceden and SWAMP have different sets of business rules. SWAMP's business rules are very strict, very comprehensive. Ceden is a little bit more lax because we have all different types of people providing data, you know, citizen monitoring, agencies like yourself. So there's different levels of the information that they collect. And so we try to, for Ceden, the business rules are the minimum of what we need. But again, it's always better to provide the most information you can because it just puts more value on your data being able to be used for multiple things. When we run it through these additional checks, you, as a Ceden data provider, are not required to fix any of them. However, we will, you know, show you what we found with these higher level checks, and you may want to go back and have us or you yourself fix those errors that the system found. And then once that process is done and it's in the database, then you have immediate access to it. So, and you can edit if you were doing something in real time and somebody went out and was QCing something and said, oh, this result was wrong, it needs to be changed. You, the data provider, can pull up your data in our system and edit the data yourself. And then you can say, okay, it's final. And then I'll mark that for export and move it to, or put it on what we call the permanent side. And then off it goes to Ceden. So that's the process of the checker. Does anybody have any questions about the checker? Okay. So now I'm going to hand it over to Marco, and he is going to show you the web forms. Marco, do you want to share? Do you?
Yeah.
I think I stopped. I think you can just.
Yeah, I think I have it now. Can you see my
Okay.
database or my desktop? It says Data Center. It has our webpage on it.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Marco Segala. I work here at Moss Landing. I've been here since 2000. For the SWAMP database, my kind of main role that I served as was bioassessment liaison. So I'm pretty familiar with all the tools and the data structures related to bioassessment data, but I also deal with just the overall database management and stuff within our own system. And so Stacy and Mary asked if I could just spend about maybe 10, 15 minutes to show you our online data management system that Stacy's been talking about. So I'll just do that really quick. Just give you guys, like Stacy said, just a general description and of what it does and what it can do to help you manage your data. And so if you're back at our main page under our data center, if you click on online data, it will take you to this new link. And up here you see we have the MPSL MLML online data management system. So this is a link that will take you there. I don't want to go there right now, but I just want to show you, or just tell you briefly, that you can see underneath it we have webinars available. So we have this one here that's 40 minutes long that is just a general overview of our system, which I presented and recorded. But then we also have some shorter webinars discussing specific topics like login and security, file tracking, lookups, things like that. So, I'm trying to give you basically this hour-long talk in 10 minutes. So that's why it's just going to be kind of brief. But if you were to click on this link, it would take you to this sign-in page. And our online system, the reason why we wanted to create this, we have two main reasons, I guess. One is when we were with the SWAMP program, we dealt with distributing access databases to all of the regional boards and the field teams and stuff like that. And so twice a month, we would pull in those replica databases and synchronize them to match up everybody's data, and then we would redistribute those data systems. that gets a little unwieldy, especially when you're trying to deal with errors and troubleshooting things like that. And so what we wanted to do was create this online system to kind of get away from Access. It's the same database structures. We still have tools that are in Access, but this online system helps get us away from that, that synchronization and replication of Access databases. Also, when we talk to users about their data and, you know, if they have their own systems, things like that, typically they would say no, or they would be working in Excel. A lot of people get really nervous or frightened of dealing with Microsoft Access, and so that was another reason why we thought if we can create an online form, it would be easier for people to access their data and manage it. And so we created this system. It's been in place for a couple of years. We're continually making enhancements to it. You know, if we find any little errors here and there, we're fixing those. But it's been something that's been growing over the last couple of years, and it is available. Everything is password protected. So we have row level security. So you will be assigned a username and a password. And what that does is it gives you access to your data, and it allows you to give coworkers or other people access to your data, but it protects it from anybody that doesn't have access to your data. They can't see it. Only you and who you assign to it can see that data. But it also is set up with permissions so that you can assign people read-only access so that they can just look at your data, or you can assign them a standard user where they can do basic editing and deletions. But, you know, it depends on the data type, or, you know, you could be a full-on DMT where you can do a lot more. So this user login and password really gives you control over the security of your data and who can see it. And so I'm just going to log in here with just the general test email. This is just a standard user in our forms. And you'll see that the main page that we have will kind of give you a description of what each of these menu items are up here. And you can also see down here at the bottom that we have a couple of links to our help desk here at Moss Landing, but also the Central Valley Regional Data Center help desk. So if you needed to contact them, the Central Valley RDC runs their data through our system as well. So it's a partnership that we developed over the last year. So a lot of their users are running their data through our system. They're using these forms as well. One thing, Stacy mentioned a lot about the lookups and going through that process, and that probably is still the preferred method for getting new lookup values reviewed. But I wanted to point out that we do have a lookups menu item here where it allows you to look at all of our current lookups. So it's as straightforward as pulling up agency lookup, or as she was talking about with stations, you can pull up stations, and we have a group by, so that if you clicked on this station lookup, that because our station tables are linked in a hierarchy, at the top level you have stations, but then you also have station details, which stores the target coordinate information. If you have associated GIS lookup information like the Cal Water number, the counties, things like that, even aliases, that you'll be able to look at existing values. So like Stacy said, if you run into errors or if you're trying to populate a data template, you can look at our existing lookup table to see if that value exists or something comparable matches that, and you can use that value. But if you want to add a new value, so in this case, if you want to add a new station code, you can actually click on this button and it will create that value within our database. And then you can notify Stacy, hey, I added this station code, can you please review it? Stacy will go through her review process. If there are any edits that need to be made, she'll make those, or she could talk to you about making those edits. And then once she thinks it's good to go, then we'll mark it that way, and then we'll notify Ceden, and it'll go on that next Saturday. It'll be sent to Ceden for their review as well. So the advantage of that is like if you're using our forms to do data entry to create samples, and you want to try to create a new sample, but you have a new station code you need to add. And if you're, working on it at night, Stacy's not available, you can go to this lookup table, add your new station code, and then go back to the forms, samples, and you can actually create your data rather than waiting for Stacy to respond, add it to our database and move through that process. So one of the things that this online system does is it really gives you real-time access to your data, real-time access to add new lookup values so that you can continue with your data entry. The other enhancement that we're working on right now is we're developing a new checker. And so let me just go back to our homepage. And so you can see under this item here that we're adding new checker forms to where you'll be able to check and submit your file, and also track your files. It's still in development right now, but the idea is that what we're moving towards is redesigning our checker so that one checker can accept all of our templates that are available. So our MPSL template, Ceden template, SWAMP template, it'll all be done through one checker. Whereas right now, we actually have two different checkers, one for Ceden data and one for SWAMP templates. So we're moving towards this one checker. Hopefully we'll have it up and available within the next 6 months or so. So that's going to be coming down the line. And then, the nice thing about it is because it's located within this, within our online system, you'll be able to check your data, and say you go to check your data and you get back an error that your station code doesn't exist. Well, you'll be able to go right here to lookups, go to stations, enter your new station, and then it'll all be in real time. You can go right back to the checker, check your file, and that error will go away because the checker is going to ping directly on these lookup values in real time. Whereas Stacy said our current setup is you have to get a new value added, and then you have to wait overnight for it to get into our checker system to remove that error. So this is just another enhancement that we're working on to try to get everything in real time. And the whole idea with this system is to really allow you to manage your data within our system. We have users that, like I said, they use Excel or, they just deal with paper copies. And so the idea with this is we wanted to make our database and tools available to you so you can treat this as your own data management system. You don't have to deal with a lot of, hiring your own IT staff or deal with designing a database on your own. Use something that's proven, it works, it exists, and it'll help get your stuff done.
Hey, Marco. It's
Yeah.
Kelly.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a quick question. So in what instance would SWAMP data be going to Moss Landing?
It's not so much as SWAMP data as if more like a SWAMP template. Gotcha. So people that are using, say, the bioassessment data entry forms, which is a standalone system, when it exports the data into a template, it's actually the SWAMP template format. When it comes to bioassessment, both the Ceden and SWAMP bioassessment templates are the same, but in our case, we prefer using our SWAMP checker to load bioassessment data into our system. So really, it's not so much SWAMP data as it is the type of template that we're talking about. So the advantage of that is right now, if your lab says that they're only set up to produce a SWAMP template for chemistry, for example, instead of them rewriting their program to output it into the Ceden chemistry template, they will be able to output it into the SWAMP template format and give it to us. So we also have run into those kind of issues in the past where we've had people say, well, the lab put all my data in a SWAMP template format, but you want me to give it to you in Ceden. Now I have to crosswalk and kind of slightly change those templates to run it through your system. Well, with this new checker, you'll be able to give us either SWAMP or Ceden templates and be able to run it through. The other thing that we're doing is we're going to allow you to run different levels of checks for each template. So this is just kind of our draft mock-up right now. So let's just say I select that I'm going to have a Ceden template, and I'm going to submit a Ceden chemistry template. What we're going to do is offer the ability to select what level of business rules you want run on that template. The basic will be just the basic formatting checks. So like you have all required fields, you don't have a text and a numeric value or numeric field, things like that. But you'll be able to choose which levels of business rules you want run. And what we're calling like mid-level would be comparable to our current Ceden checks. And then we'd have high level, which would be comparable to swamp checks. Typically being a swamp has more stringent requirements when it comes to checking your data. So you could submit a Ceden chemistry template into our database, but run swamp business rule checks on it if you want that higher level of checking on your file before it's submitted. So whereas like right now in our current system, if you have a Ceden chemistry template, you're only running these Ceden chemistry business rules on it. So that's kind of the advantage that we're working towards. And like I said, it's just in development right now.
Marco, did you show the file tracking?
No, I'm going to do that right now.
Okay.
So you'll see here under the checker that we have file status and tracking. This is where it's going to move to. But as Stacy talked about earlier, we do have a current file tracking system set up for people that are using our checker right now. And so if you go to this file tracking, you'll see that everything's based on a filtering so that nothing shows up below. And you can use different categories to filter your data. So let's just say I want to pull up this particular timestamp. And it'll pull up that data, and you can see that on this day that Jay Chung from Babcock submitted a Ceden chemistry template to us, and they ran Ceden business rules on it. And you can see that Stacy was the person that worked on it. The data status is that it's loaded. It was submitted on July 11th. She loaded it on that same day. And then if you wanted to look to see what projects were included in it, it was only one project code, TMDL-IR. And you can see that it wasn't required to be delivered to Ceden, but we still made it available to Ceden because they said that, yeah, it was okay to do that. And so Stacy updated it that it's available to Ceden, and it was available on July 15th of 2016. So in this particular case, you can see that it was submitted on the 11th, loaded the same day, and it was available and transferred to Ceden on 4 days later. So the advantage of this file tracking system is that it allows you to kind of keep track of your submitted files a little bit easier. We had this request from certain providers, or like Region 3 in particular, where they have multiple providers that want to submit their data. And rather than trying to maintain a separate Google document, this way it could all be online and available rather than trying to go through Google Docs and doing those updates. So you can go, through and filter using these different categories to check on the status of your files. Let me go back to our home page. Now, for the forms that we have, you can see that we have both what's called forms entry and forms all. And the way our database is set up is we kind of have what's called a status field, and it indicates what's the status of that data. And really we have two main statuses, whether it's entry or perm. Entry is a designation for all of your draft data, and it means that you're able to add, edit, and delete that data. But once you've done all your QC checks, you say that that data is set and ready to go. Well, then we want to say that that data is perm, or it's permanent, it's set. We don't anticipate making any future changes. And so when it gets that status change, then we don't want just anybody to be able to go and edit it. So we use these forms all page to where you can view both your draft and your perm data. And if you look up here at the menu items, that you can see that it's broken down in a hierarchy, moving from the high level samples all the way down to locations, collections, down through the specific lab results, tissue results, and the breakdown. Now in the forms all, where you can view and add only, you can see that it's the same setup, samples, locations, and the individual results. But the difference is really what you can do within each of those forms. So if I just open the samples entry form, you can see that I have an add button. I also have a delete button available to me. Let me just pick up this test project code. When I look at it, it'll pull up a record, and you can see that I have this edit button available. I can also delete the specific record, but you can see this is where it shows, the specific sample that was created, but then it also shows the associated tables below it. So when Stacy was talking about how you could go out, collect samples, and enter that information through our forms, this is what you can do. So like say if I went out yesterday and I collected some water chemistry samples and probe measurements, I can come in that night or later that day, create a sample. I can add my field crew through the personnel tab. I can create my locations. In this case, they used AA1. And I can move down the line through locations and collections and then down into lab results. And what that's doing is it's creating my sample through collection information. And then once you do that, then you can actually go to our queries menu item, and you can see that we have standard outputs available for all the different data types. So samples, locations, geometry, benthic results, field habitat. We have standard output for our lab results with QA and without QA. So that way, if you have your data available, it's already in our system and you want to report it, we have ways to do that. We also have this QC query where if you want to look for any lab collections that do not have results associated with it, say you want to finalize your project so that you can send it to Ceden, you want to run this check just to make sure that there are no collections without results. This is a way to do it. The other nice thing about our query output, our standard output, is we also have template output. So we can output in both the Ceden and the SWAMP template output. So for Ceden, for example, we have two types of output. We have, this is focused on chemistry. So we have chemistry AA and chem results. Now the difference is, like the chem results query output is going to give you all of your data that's currently in our database. So it's sample through results, has everything in the Ceden chemistry template format. But going back to the example about sampling, and you create your samples, and now you want to give that sample through collection information to the laboratory so that they can then append their chemistry data to it, you can come here and output it using the Ceden Chem AA tab. This will give you the, I think it was like column A through R is what Stacy showed in that template. This will provide that information so that you can populate it in your template, give it to your laboratory, and so when they add their chemistry data to it and run it through our checker, well, you shouldn't get those errors that your samples do not exist, station code does not exist, things like that, because you're basically giving them all of that information to line up their data. Right now in our queries, these are just standard outputs, but we do have the ability to add project-specific output. We do this for the ILRP program. You can't see it right now because I don't have permission as the standard user to see it, but the ILRP program had 3 specific queries to look at their field habitat or field tox and chemistry data. So we added that output here so that they can come pull out their data and their specific formatting needs and do all their reporting. So if you're using our system and you have a specific reporting requirement or output that you want that you can like put into your system for analyses or just standard report formatting, we can work with you to get that incorporated. So those are kind of like just a very brief description about what's available in our system. One thing that I also wanted to add is we're not only developing our checker system or a new checker system, but we're also working on time series. And so Stacy mentioned that. Right now you can see under forms, there's just a kind of a placeholder for it. But we have worked out updated time series database table formats and a template. It's similar to what Stacy showed as our current template that's available on our website, but we underwent a process to just review and see if it's really what we wanted to do before incorporating it. And so we're making some slight changes to it. It does exist in our database. We haven't made it live yet because one thing that we're currently working on is a data conversion tool. So right now it's going to be in Microsoft Access. It's a standalone tool. You know, one of the big issues that people have with time series data is, you know, you only get a output from the logger that maybe has a date timestamp, a result value, and maybe a QA flag associated with it. Typically, that logger output doesn't even tell you what or associate what the analyte is with it, because if, like, say, for example, it's a hobo temperature logger, well, you just know that those results are linked or represent water temperature or air temperature, depending if it's in the water or it's in the air. And so what we're doing is we're creating this tool to allow you to create samples, and then you can pull in that logger data. Like, so this is a typical example. You'll be able to import it into this standalone Access database. And then once you have it in here, then you can manage that data to add in all of the necessary associated metadata information. So you've already added your samples, your collection information. Here's my analyte. And say you want to update the QA code or the compliance code, you'll have ways to do batch updates. So you want to add personnel to all of your data, you'll be able to do that using this form. And we're also going to add the ability to plot the data. So if you want to plot the data looking for outliers, you'll be able to do that within this tool. And once you're comfortable with that data set, you can go to reports, and then you'll be able to export that data into a template, and it'll look something like this. Is the template that we're working on, and it's, you know, very similar to the current Ceden and SWAMP template formats, where you kind of have the sample information, the collection information, the constituents, the analyte stuff, and then here's the specific result information. And so this file's in Excel, but we'll probably work a lot with CSV files just because there's so much data associated with time series data. But this is a tool that we're working on to make it easier for you to be able to take data out of your logger and format it and convert it into the proper templates for loading. As we get closer to finalizing all of our structures, we are going to present it to State Board as another option for them, because I think it was last winter, December or January is when SWAMP and put out a call to people that they were evaluating time series data structures. So we are going to present this to the State Board. If they adopt it, it'll be great, because then we can transfer data. We'll be able to transfer data from our system into theirs. If they decide to go another route, we still feel confident that with the structure that we create, we'll be able to crosswalk it into whatever system or setup the State Board decides to move forward with. So this is going to be available within the next 6 months, and you know, even though Ceden cannot accept it at this time, you know, we didn't want to keep our data providers from sending it to us. You know, we want to make it available. That way you can get into a database system, and then you can move forward with your data analyses, your data reporting, things like that, rather than you having to kind of manage it yourself within your own system, set up on your own network. So that's also in development, and it's coming down the line, like I said. So hopefully within the next 6 months, we'll have both our checker and our time series up and running within this system as well. Okay, so I think I went through that pretty quickly, but I know we hit our kind of 2-hour time limit. If people have questions, feel free to contact me. You know, I can answer any questions about the database or this new development. You know, if you have specific questions about the data, you can talk with Stacy about that. Stacy, was there anything else you wanted to add? I'm pretty much done right now.
No, we gave at the bottom of the agenda is our contact information. You know, feel free to email with any questions, additional questions. If some of you are getting ready to want to start submitting, just contact me and we can start the process with your data sets.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank Mary for setting this up. You know, I know that a lot of people that submit data to Ceden have a lot of questions, and it's, you know, it's hard to really get people together to just sit down and talk. So I just wanted to thank Mary on that. And Mary, do you have any other items you wanted to discuss or say anything as we're kind of nearing the end?
No, I mean, thank you, especially for sharing all that you know. I know it may be a little overwhelming for the people who are participating in the training. Marco and Stacy deal with this every day, and they have dealt with this for decades, data validation, and they've also done the monitoring, verifying data. So it can be a little daunting if you're trying to begin this process on your own. And I think we're convinced that they're great resources to have, and thank you for that. You know, sitting in my position, I know the regional board, we would appreciate that data collectors in our region upload the data, but this could entail, you know, a position. You don't have the resources to do that. So I guess I can suggest, you know, contracts for any projects that you're working on with the regional board, maybe had the scope of work and the budgets that you're working on before that contract's approved, with this in mind that you're gonna, you know, ideally we want to get this into Ceden. You know, we want to partner and leverage our monitoring resources as much as possible, and putting everything in Ceden allows us to identify gaps, and also, you know, in the long run, it helps us focus restoration and management measures that we need. So anyway, I'm kind of creatively trying to go through different ways that we can come up with some resources to help individuals get that data into Ceden. But in the meantime, I think Moss Landing and Marine Laboratories is going to be a great resource that we can tap into. And when, you know, you can certainly call the regional board. Kelly Huck here has years of experience with data uploads, and we will try to help and facilitate as much as we can with that process. And thank you all for taking the time out of your days to listen in on this. Yeah, and I did, just as far as participants, I think I recognize everybody except for, there's a phone number, it's a 587-2525. If you're still on the line, could you just identify yourself? 587-2525.
Yeah.
And then someone who is TIS.
It's TSA, Tahoe Truckee Sanitation Agency.
No, it's TIS, UPOV.
The phone number 587-2525
is associated to Tahoe Truckee Sanitation Agency.
And Kevin?
Yeah, it's Kevin Schoonmaker and Greg Hoover from Tahoe Keys.
Oh, excellent.
Hi, this is Tatiana Islov. I'm with the State Water Board.
Yeah, I think that was everything. I would like to get some feedback, maybe offline, from people in our region who are actively uploading data into Ceden, and, you know, did they find this useful? What new information was learned? Anything else maybe that would have been nice to cover? And that will just help for when we set up maybe additional training sessions.
And also it'd be nice, Mary, I don't know if you have it already, but just if Marco and Stacy, maybe just, can you just give us the links to all the resources that you pointed out today? Just like
Of course.
Description, and then we'll forward that to all the people that are RSVP.
No problem.
Any final questions or comments? Yeah, I guess it was.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you guys so much.
All right. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.